Hello, it's Rebecca from the Glitch Stitchery. Today I wanted to start my first of probably 3 videos on rigid heddle weaving. Specifically, today we're going to be talking about warp. Now this is literally the most important step of weaving. I know it sounds like I'm overstating things, but literally this will make or break your woven piece. So I want to talk about what I look for in yarns when I'm choosing yarns for weaving, what not to choose, and I'm going to actually warp up the loom, and then I'm going to show you a couple things, just little tricks that help me personally. So, first things first, no matter what you do, when you are choosing your yarn for weaving, the first thing you got to decide is what material you want it made out of. And I know that sounds like super basic, but there are some very finicky points you need to keep in mind. Technically, you can weave with almost anything, but your warp has to be strong, enough to hold tension specifically. So if it's a hand spun yarn, you're going to want to test it, make sure it has some strength in it, make sure that when you put tension on it, it's not just going to break on you. If it is made of, let's say, alpaca or mohair, probably not going to want to use that. Not because of the strength, but because they fuzz. So as you move the heddle back and forth, they're going to get increasingly fluffy. The fluffy fibers are going to stick to the fluffy fibers from the other strands of yarn, and eventually you're going to have to sit there and individually comb each strand apart as you're weaving. I say this as someone who has done this multiple times. It's terrible, don't do it. It was literally like the worst project I've ever worked on in my life. It took like a week and a half to make one scarf because I had to sit there and pick apart all the strands every time I wanted to move the heddle, because otherwise the heddle was just locked in place by a bunch of fuzzy strands of mohair or alpaca or both. I can't remember. But it's not just mohair and alpaca that'll do it either, because I had a similar experience with a hand-spun wool yarn that was made of cheviot, and it just happened to be a very fuzzy cheviot. I think it was a woolen spun instead of a worsted spun. Most of my yarns are worsted spun. That one happened to be woolen spun. And again, fuzzed up, almost felted across. And I had to sit there with a comb every time I wanted to weave. Don't do that to yourself. It's not worth it. Secondly, in addition to making sure that your yarn is strong enough and not fuzzy, you're also going to want to make sure that what you use as a warp, you use the same thing, or at least the same materials, across the entire piece. When I first started weaving, there were a few projects where I was like, well, I have a scrap of this, and a scrap of that, and a scrap of this, and they're all the same weight, so let's do that. But one of them was bamboo, one of them was cotton, and the other 2 were wool. When you put those different things under tension, wool stretches. Bamboo and cotton do not. So when the scarf was finished and I took it off tension, the stretched wool snapped back. The bamboo and cotton didn't, and the fabric puckered all over the place. It was awful. Now, if you do it purposefully, you could potentially cause the fabric to pucker in a way that makes like really cool waves or something. But for the most part, you're going to want your warp to all be the same material. All wool, all cotton, or all bamboo, or something like that. So this requires a little bit more planning, and it might require some experimentation, because if you have a yarn that is mostly wool and just has a tiny bit of cotton in it, depending on how it was blended and how it was spun, it might work or it might not work. So you might have to do some tests. But for the most part, make sure everything is the same material. Now, the next thought is another mistake I made in the beginning, but it's a little bit more obvious when you think about it. Now when you have, I'm going to pull one out, so one second. When you have a reed, or heddle, I mean, I guess either term is correct. Okay, this is the rigid heddle part of a rigid heddle loom, okay? You have all the slots and holes, see? And the yarn is going to come through these, obviously. You want to match the weight of the yarn to the size of the slots and holes. Now, if you are weaving with hand spun yarn, which I do a lot because I have a lot of hand spun yarn, and your hand spun yarn is not 100% the same thickness and has some lumpy bumpy parts, match the size of the holes to the biggest lumps. Otherwise, when you get to that part, you'll go to move the heddle and it will cause undue strain on the thicker parts. Now this can do one of several things. It might just cause that particular part to fluff up, causing the same problems I talked about earlier. Or, since thicker parts of the yarn tend to be weaker because they have less twist, you could actually wear through the yarn and then your thread snaps, and that's bad. It's very hard to fix, like on the fly like that. I mean, it's doable, but it's very annoying, and you don't want to do that. So, match the yarn at its thickest point to your heddle. Now let me see, what else did I want to talk about before I get started? It's a very wide topic, and I don't want to seem too picky about it either, because technically speaking, there's still a lot you can do with this, but I want to make sure you don't make any of the same mistakes I did. Now, for the most part, when I'm weaving, 90% of the time, my warp is sock yarn. Now, the reason for that is that sock yarn is meant to be really, really strong. So, since it's meant to be for socks, it's spun to be really hard wearing and stretchy and can handle almost anything. So I use a lot of sock yarn for warping. Now, obviously, I don't like the nylon in it, and I am looking for alternatives, but I also have a lot of it built up, so I'm just working through my stash. This one is what I'm going to warp with today. So this is a very basic sock yarn. I am a little nervous about it because it has Angora in it, but it's only 10%, and I've been doing some fuzz tests. I haven't noticed any issues with this one specifically. You're going to want to test whatever you use. I'm assuming it means Angora rabbit and not Angora goat, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, this is Wisdom Yarns Angora lace, 462 yards to 3.5 ounces, 60% fine merino wool, superwash, 10% Angora, 30% nylon. Color Cerulean. Okay, there we go. So, when I warp with this, I am going to be double threading my heddle, which means that every hole is going to have 2 strings coming through it. And I'm going to take a video during warping so you can see what I'm talking about. But generally speaking, you have 2 options when you're direct warping, which is what I always do. I'm not even going to talk about the other type of warping because I've never done it. So you have a tool. Let's see if I can reach it. Should be in, like, right behind my camera. There it is. I found it. Okay, so this is my warping tool. Now when I have this set up, the small part fits through the holes, the wide part fits through the slots. Now if you are single warping, which is what most people do, I'm just not most people. If you're single warping, you're just going to be pulling through the slots, which means you're just using this half for most of the warping. And then when you're done warping, you cut it and you change it so it's only 1 thread going through everything. 1 thread in each hole and slot, all the way across. Now what I'm doing, since this is a finer yarn, I'm going to be pulling through every hole and every slot. And there'll be 2 threads coming through each. And you will understand all of this better in a few minutes. But this means that I'll end up with a thicker warp than I would if I just used 1 of each of these. And also, because of the way it tends to weave, they'll end up sort of sitting next to each other instead of twisting around each other, so it's kind of a flat look, and I kind of like that. So I'm going to go get the loom set up. I'm going to start warping this, and then you'll see what I'm talking about, hopefully. So, 1 minute. All right, hopefully you can see what I'm doing from this angle. It's a little hard to find exactly where to put the camera for this. So, I have the loom set up. At this point, the pawls are in the locked position, so this isn't going to shift at all. This warping bar, I can't remember any of the right terms for this. What is that called? I call it the warp bar. I don't know if that's actually accurate or not. Is attached to the heddle with rubber bands so it won't move. Normally people would sort of lock the loom down to a table or something while they're warping. I don't actually have a place to do that, so I usually just set it up on the stand and put a chair in front of it to keep it from moving. Now the warp strands are currently wrapped around a peg that I have in the other room. You can't see it from here, but that's pretty normal for warping, I think, having them attached to a peg. So I'm gonna go around here. I loop it around, right, and then I put my hook through the slot. I pull it through. It pulls through as a loop, like this. And that's why there's 2 strands in each one, because I'm pulling through loops. So loop goes around the peg in the other room. Then I come back, pull it over, and you're kind of alternating going over and under on this bar as you warp. Next one goes through a hole, pull through a loop, and since I'm double threading the holes and slots, that is what I do the whole way across. Nothing changes. It's just back and forth as around the bar, pulling loops through, and eventually the whole thing will be warped. So I'm going to go into time lapse, and then we'll talk about the next step. All right, so now that I've got the whole thing warped, all of the holes and slots are filled with 2 strands each. Now I will be winding it onto the back beam. And when you're doing this, you don't want the yarns to sit on top of each other, because then you get really bad tension. The first few times I did this, I did not pack the warp with paper while I was winding it on, because I thought that was, oh, that's unnecessary and stupid. It is not unnecessary and stupid. It is very necessary. So because of the size of this loom, I just use printer paper. It fits fine. For a larger loom, I have, like for the 24-inch, I have wrapping paper, the plain brown wrapping paper, and I cut it to be the right length across. Every loom is going to be a slightly different size depending on which one you buy, so you're going to have to experiment with what type of paper works best for you. And some people don't even use paper. I haven't tried other materials yet, but I do want to. Also, remember when I was warping it around the peg, I was bringing loops? Before you start doing anything else, cut the loop so it's all just strands at the end. Every time I don't do this, they end up getting tangled around each other, and that's bad. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna hold this at a reasonably good tension. You're going to unlock the back pawl and start turning it. And you're going to very slowly wind it on, trying to keep it at a good tension. Keep all the strands even. You can't really see my hand, but I've got a good grip on it. And once I make one full rotation, I lock it again. And I'm doing this all solo. Some people have a second person help them, which then I wouldn't have to stop and start as much. But because I'm one person, I stop it, lock it, stick a piece of printer paper in there. Unlock it, do a tiny little bit of a turn just to get it stuck on there. Grab this back with my hand, get the grip going again, turn, slowly to keep it tightly on the paper. Paper's done, lock it again. Next piece of printer paper. Unlock it, start it a little bit, get the grip on here, smooth out the strings if they look like they're getting tangled, which they inevitably will. It's just part of life. So get a good grip. And if I remember to, I count how many pieces of paper I've used total so that as I'm weaving and they fall out the back, I can see how close I am to being done. Right now we're at 2. So, number 3. Get it started. Pull that back. And again, you want to keep as even a tension as you can because this will make or break your piece. If some parts are really loose compared to the rest of it, your scarf will do some funky things in that area. In the beginning, when I would have different scraps going of all different colors, some of them would end up warped at different tensions because I didn't really know what I was doing. And this caused curves in the way the yarns went across the warp, and it puckered in some areas or have a big half circle in another. I didn't really know why it was doing that until I got better and I was like, oh, that would be it. So if you're just starting, it'd be better to start doing it right from the beginning so you don't have these issues and you don't waste a bunch of yarn on scarves you don't like. I ended up giving them away as gifts to people because I'm a horrible person, but otherwise I don't know what I would have done with them other than possibly donate them to a thrift store. So yeah, it's better to just avoid this problem in the first place. You're not going to start off perfect, but if you can start from a better spot than I did, then that's great. You're already doing great. So yeah, just keep your tension as even as possible. I'm almost, I think just one more piece of paper and then I will be tying on to the front beam. So, where is my front? Okay, it's over there. Okay, yeah, that should be good. All right, so at this point, you're going to want to untangle it a little bit because it's definitely going to be a little tangly from being pulled through all those holes and just in general. Once it's pretty smooth, I usually slide it all, like I'll take it, split it down the middle, put it off to both sides. You'll understand this in a moment. Now on the front of this particular loom, I have these 2 apron strings and here's my front beam. So we're going to get the front beam set up, make sure it's even, start winding it on right about there. Let's see if I can adjust the camera so you can see a little better maybe. All right, one moment. All right, I think you can see it now mostly. Yeah, let's go with that. All right, so have my apron bar, have my strings. What I want to do is tie them to the apron bar so that I get good tension and I can move the yarn back and forth and it's where everything needs to be. So ideally you want them to be in 1-inch-ish bunchings, or at least that's what I was told when I was learning how to do this. You might hear other things from other people. This is just how I was told to do it. This is a 7.5 dents per inch reed. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. about that many per knotted portion. Personally, I go under, go through the center, break it into two, and then loop it around and make a knot. This is not my final knot. This is just a knot to hold it in place while I tie all the other ones, and then at the end I'll adjust them so that they're all the same tension, but this will hold it in place while I do that. So roughly 1-inch bunches. Everyone has a slightly different way of doing this. This is just how I personally was shown how to do it. You might have a way that works better for you. But I usually start with the center bunch and then alternate left and right until I'm done. And I work from the center out. Almost done here, probably just 3 more bunches. And you may notice that some of them are a little shorter than the others. This is just because of the angle I was warping at. It is pretty normal for me, and in the long run won't make a huge difference because the length difference is just going to be down here, and that's mostly going to get trimmed off when I do the fringe anyway. So yeah, as long as it's not causing issues up here, it's not a big deal. You don't have to worry about it. It's never going to be perfect anyway. Alright, so now we're going to make sure that the tension's good. I'm going to go back through, tighten them all, and do a second knot. Some people tie a bow at this step. I personally never have enough back here to tie bows, and I don't really want to waste extra warp doing that, so I don't bother. But you can tie bows if you want. It's really up to you. I'm happy as long as they are all the right tension. Alright, and I tighten it a little bit like that. And we're going to, I don't have warp separators for the smaller loom, so I usually just use a couple pieces of paper. Up position. Get that through there. The point of this is to open up the warp so it's all where it needs to be and you can use it correctly. And you do tend to find that it's a little tangly at the bottom when you do this. Bottom position. just adjust everything and get it ready to start weaving. All right, we are good to go. So that is it for this video. The next video we'll be talking about weft, so that's this way. And the video after that we'll be talking about weaving a sampler. Now, as I said, this one was double threading the warp. Video number 3, we're gonna have a single threaded warp, so we will come back to that. For now, I'm gonna finish this up and we are going to start on weft. Thanks for watching. If you like my work and would like to see more, please follow the links in the description below to my Instagram and blog, or show your support by buying me a coffee. Most of all, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.